For centuries, wars have been fought over resources. But soon, we could be seeing more fighting over arguably the most precious resource of all, water.
There are too few resources for too many people, and they end up fighting with one another.
As climate change gets worse and the planet gets hotter and drier, the fight for water is only going to intensify. So where could we see water wars, and how likely are they to actually happen? By 2025, the UN predicts 2/3 of the global population will live in water-scarce areas. 5 years after that, it's thought that 700 million around the world could be at risk of displacement by water scarcity. There's no gray area here. People cannot live without water. So a lack of access to water pretty much leaves you with two options. Either you move somewhere where there is access, or you fight for what's available.
So looking back over the past 50 years, we have yet to see a true water war. Typically, countries don't go to war over any one single issue. It's usually a complex mixture of issues that leads countries to go to war.
I'm not thinking that most water problems or climate problems, if you wish, end up being wars of the conventional sense of, say, Russia versus Ukraine. It's more the undermining of the social order that, of course, undermines security within a country, but it can bleed over into another neighboring country or even further away.
In 2018, the Joint Research Center listed these places as likely sites for so-called hydropolitical interactions: the Nile, Ganges-Brahmaputra, Indus, Tigris-Euphrates, and Colorado rivers. Here in Sudan, where the Niles meet to form the longest river in the world, violence over water resources is sadly commonplace. Ancient Nubia and Egypt fought over control of the Nile Valley for centuries, and in more recent times, the scramble for water and arable land has fueled intercommunal conflict around the country.
Since 2003, 200,000 people have been killed in Darfur.
On Darfur, indeed, in many ways, we are in a free fall.
It's a terrible situation, and a resolution must come soon.
In the early 2000s, fighting broke out between nomadic herders and sedentary farmers in the dry Darfur region. The changing climate of Sudan meant that groups had to compete more and more for land and water. The violent rivalry and government crackdown killed and displaced hundreds of thousands of people. Water scarcity wasn't the sole reason for this war, but it was certainly one of the major causes of it, and clashes are ongoing today.
Land is not good enough if you are rural communities. You need to have water to make that land valuable. So we have seen there in areas like Sudan, like Darfur, where there's been access to land issues and domination of land and use of that land, leading to violence between communities. And that is really the concern for the future, that the climate change that is already happening could be driving these sort of local conflicts ever more.
Just beyond the country's borders, a major controversy is brewing over water now, one that has threatened to develop into a major war. This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It's a huge hydropower dam on the Blue Nile, a tributary of the Nile that starts in Ethiopia. It's estimated to have cost billions of dollars and will eventually have a 6,000 megawatt capacity, the equivalent to 6 nuclear power stations. Once fully active, it will be the largest hydroelectric power plant in Africa and will be a big boost to Ethiopia's economy. But it has also heightened political tension across the region. Egypt relies heavily on the Nile. In fact, nearly all of its water comes from the river. Any disturbance to the water level could have massive consequences in Egypt, something the country is well aware of.
This is literally someone's lifeline. And this Grand Renaissance Dam is being built across the segment of the Nile that feeds Egypt with 85% of its water. So they're deathly afraid of this. And they are doing a lot of saber rattling, even suggesting that, violent conflict could be in the cards.
Since the first brick was laid back in 2011, Egypt has tried to stop the dam being built. At times, military conflict has seemed close. In 2013, senior Egyptian politicians were caught on camera discussing whether to destroy the dam, though advisor to the then president played that down to Sky News.
It would not be totally acceptable to talk about military options when they did not explore other options as well. However, exactly as you said, it's a matter of life for Egypt.
In 2019, Ethiopian President Abiy Ahmed said no force could prevent the country from finishing the dam.
The filling of that dam, and these dams are massive, mega projects that take anywhere between 5 and 10 years to fill the dam reservoir. So it's during this filling stage, which has already started, where the greatest potential for conflict lies. So there you might have some dry years and the flow of the Nile is going to be naturally reduced and less water will be allowed to flow downstream, as Ethiopia's interest will be to hold as much back to fill the dam as fast as possible. So it's during the next few years where the greatest potential for conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt really comes to bear.
Water wars have been happening for centuries, but there's a big reason why we may be seeing more in the future: climate change. Increasing global temperatures causes more water to evaporate, changing the water cycle. That means more heavy rainfall in some places and more drought in others.
When we speak with local communities in different parts of Africa where I work, local farming communities will use the present tense when they talk about climate change impacts, not the future. They're not talking about a far-off future where rainfall is going to be altered. They're talking about today. And in some cases, at that very local level, we've actually seen that break out into armed conflict between these groups as they're competing for increasingly scarce water resources.
But all of this does not mean water wars are inevitable. In the past, countries and communities have been more likely to cooperate to tackle any water crises. Even at the Nile Dam, despite years of tension, it is yet to boil over. But there's no escaping the fact that the world is getting hotter and drier. And as access to such a vital resource like water becomes more and more difficult for people globally, they could turn to more extreme measures to secure it.
Greater pressures placed on water resources, the need for economies to continue growing, the need for cities to take on board more and more products and services that are water intensive, and of course climate change, changing that whole scenario, that could change things. The future could look different to the past.